Think of ancient Egypt, and what comes to mind? Towering pyramids, golden pharaohs, sprawling deserts. But what if I told you there's an entire hidden dimension to this civilization that's been overlooked for centuries? Beneath the sands and beyond the monuments lies a secret network of waterways, ports, and maritime routes that were just as vital to Egypt's rise as the stones of Giza. This is the story of how a civilization known for its deserts mastered the art of water, building an invisible empire of trade, power, and connection that stretched across the ancient world. Picture this: long before the Suez Canal, Egypt's engineers were carving pathways through the land, linking the Nile to the Red Sea, creating a web of canals and harbors that turned the country into the world's first superhighway of commerce. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were acts of genius, allowing goods, ideas, and cultures to flow into Egypt from as far away as the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. Yet somehow, this maritime legacy has been buried by time, overshadowed by the grandeur of pyramids and temples, until now, today, we're setting sail on a journey to uncover Egypt's forgotten waterways. We'll decode ancient maps, dive into the ruins of lost ports, and piece together how a civilization built on sand became a master of the seas. This isn't just about rediscovering the past, it's about rewriting what we thought we knew. Because when you look beyond the pyramids, you'll find an Egypt that was as much a nation of sailors as it was of builders, where the pulse of the empire didn't just beat in the heart of the desert, but along the currents of its hidden rivers and coasts. So come aboard, we're about to see ancient Egypt in a whole new light. The Nile was more than just water flowing through the desert. It was the beating heart of an empire, a liquid highway that shaped every aspect of ancient Egyptian life. Picture a civilization where the rhythm of the river dictated the rhythm of society. Every summer, the Nile's floods didn't just nourish crops, they marked the start of trade seasons, when ships laden with gold from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, and spices from distant lands would ride the swollen currents northward. Engineers didn't just rely on nature's bounty, they mastered it, digging canals to bypass treacherous rapids and dredging basins where goods could be loaded under the shadow of temples. Granite for statues, wheat for bread, even the massive limestone blocks for pyramids, all of it moved on the Nile's back. But the real genius lay in how Egypt turned the river's branches into a sprawling network of docks and harbors. Near Memphis, the capital's twin ports bustled with ships arriving from the Mediterranean, while farther south, the city of Thebes thrived as a hub linking Red Sea traders to the Nile's flow. The river didn't just connect cities, it fused cultures, bringing Mesopotamian tin, Aegean olive oil, and African ivory into the workshops of Egyptian artisans. And here's the twist: the Nile's maritime role was no accident. Temple records reveal how pharaohs timed military campaigns to coincide with high water, using the river as a rapid troop transport. When drought struck, they dug emergency channels to keep trade alive. This wasn't just a river, it was a tool, a weapon, and a blueprint for Egypt's later ventures into the open sea. The pyramids may stand silent on the horizon, but the Nile whispers the deeper truth. Egypt's greatness was built on water as much as stone. Buried beneath the mud and reeds of the Nile Delta, the ghostly outlines of ancient docks emerge, silent witnesses to a time when Egypt's wealth flowed through these very shores. At Tel el-Dabba, archaeologists brush away layers of earth to reveal something extraordinary: a sprawling port complex where ships from Crete, Cyprus, and beyond once unloaded their cargo. Here, beneath what's now a quiet field, Olive oil from the Aegean mingled with Nubian gold, while merchants haggled over prices under the watchful eyes of tax collectors. This wasn't just a dock, it was a global crossroads hidden in plain sight. Satellite images tell an even more startling story. Infrared scans expose the faint scars of canals radiating outward from these ports, like spokes on a wheel, connecting them to temples, warehouses, and royal palaces. One such canal, nearly 40 meters wide, once allowed ships to sail directly to the doorstep of a pharaoh's granary. Imagine the scene: towering cedar ships from byblos, their sails emblazoned with foreign symbols, gliding past farmers tending emmer wheat, all while scribes tallied jars of honey and blocks of lapis lazuli. But the real revelation lies in the smaller details. At the site of Avaris, excavators found not just Egyptian pottery, but fragments of Minoan cups and Syrian storage jars, proof that these ports were melting pots of culture. Even the mud bricks tell a story. Some bear the fingerprints of laborers pressed into service during the annual floods, when the pharaohs mobilized thousands to dredge channels before the trading season began. And then there are the ceremonial docks. Near Luxor, a grand stone quay stretches into what was once the Nile, its steps worn smooth by the bare feet of priests carrying statues of gods during festivals. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was theater, a stage where Egypt showcased its power to both citizens and foreign envoys. When a Hittite ambassador arrived, his ship would have been guided to a designated berth, his first steps onto Egyptian soil carefully choreographed to awe him. These ports did more than handle goods, they shaped history. When drought struck and the Nile ran low, it was the dredging of these harbors that kept grain moving and rebellions at bay. When a pharaoh launched a campaign into Canaan, it was from these very banks that his troops marched onto waiting ships. The pyramids may symbolize eternity, but these forgotten docks were where Egypt's pulse could truly be felt, where the empire's fate was decided, one shipment at a time. Tucked away in a windswept cave overlooking the Red Sea, a bundle of papyrus pages lay hidden for over 4.5 millennia, until archaeologists brushed off the sand to reveal something extraordinary. These weren't just any ancient texts. They were the meticulously kept logs of a harbor master named Murrah, a man whose job it was to oversee the movement of ships during the reign of Khufu, the pharaoh who commissioned the Great Pyramid. What makes these fragile pages so revolutionary isn't just their age, though they do hold the title of the oldest surviving papyrus documents, but what they tell us about Egypt's forgotten mastery of the seas. Each entry reads like a window into a bustling port day. One log details the arrival of a shipment of limestone from Murrah, carefully noting the names of the crew members, the weight of the cargo, and even the rations of bread and beer issued to the sailors. Another records a voyage along the coast, listing the stops at way stations where fresh water was stockpiled for passing ships. But the real revelation: these weren't haphazard operations. The precision in these records rivals the same administrative brilliance that built the pyramids. Columns of numbers track everything from the number of oarsmen on each vessel to the quantities of copper tools shipped to construction sites. What emerges from these faded ink strokes is a portrait of a maritime machine operating with military precision. Ships didn't just wander the coast, they followed scheduled routes with designated stops for supplies and repairs. Crews were rotated systematically and cargo was inspected at checkpoints. Some entries even hint at a proto-postal system, with ships carrying sealed messages between royal outposts. But here's what's truly astonishing. While we've long marveled at the pyramids as feats of engineering, these logs reveal that Egypt's maritime infrastructure was just as sophisticated. The same culture that aligned the Great Pyramid to true north also charted the currents of the Red Sea with startling accuracy. The harbour at Wadi el-Jarf wasn't just a dock, it was a nexus, linking the pyramid's construction to a vast network of quarries, coastal towns, and trade routes. One poignant entry describes a storm delaying a shipment of granite for Khufu's burial chamber. The frustration in Murrah's careful handwriting is palpable proof that even in ancient Egypt, logistics could be as unpredictable as the sea itself. Yet day after day, these sailors returned to the waves, their efforts as vital to Egypt's glory as the stonecutters and architects. The pyramids may stand as monuments to eternity, but these fragile pages remind us they were built by hands that knew the water as intimately as the land. South of Cairo, where the desert now stretches endlessly, there once shimmered a body of water so vast it could be seen from space, Lake Moaris, ancient Egypt's answer to the unpredictable moods of the Nile. But this was no ordinary lake. Imagine an artificial reservoir so precisely engineered that it could store enough water to feed millions during drought, while doubling as a naval training ground where Egypt's future sailors mastered the art of shipbuilding and navigation. Built over 4,000 years ago, this mega-project wasn't just about survival, it was about dominance. The genius of Lake Moaris lay in its dual purpose. When the Nile's floods were too weak, sluice gates opened, releasing stored water into a network of canals that turned parched fields lush within days. When floods raged too violently, the lake absorbed the excess, preventing catastrophic damage downstream. But here's what's even more remarkable. The same canals that carried life-giving water also served as maritime highways. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of massive shipyards along its shores, where cedar planks from Lebanon were shaped into vessels sturdy enough to navigate both the lake's calm waters and the open sea. Fragments of ship models and training manuals found nearby suggest this was where sailors practiced maneuvers before venturing onto the Nile or the Mediterranean. Think of it as ancient Egypt's naval academy, a place where pilots learned to read currents, where engineers tested new hull designs, and where navigators memorized the stars. One surviving papyrus even details a mock battle staged on the lake, with hundreds of oarsmen executing coordinated turns under the watchful eyes of royal observers. The lake's strategic importance extended far beyond training. Its shores hosted bustling markets where grain from the Nile Delta was stockpiled in enormous silos, creating a buffer against famine. During the reign of Amenemhat III, records show how officials diverted entire harvests to these storehouses, ensuring that even when the Nile failed, Egypt wouldn't. And when foreign traders arrived, their ships were directed to special docks where their cargo, whether Aegean silver or African ebony, could be taxed before entering the kingdom's heartland. Yet perhaps the most telling clue to Lake Moaris' significance lies in its abandonment. When the climate shifted and the Nile's patterns changed, the lake slowly vanished, and with it, Egypt's edge over its rivals. The same waters that once nurtured innovation became a ghostly imprint in the sand, a reminder that even the mightiest civilizations rely not just on stone and gold, but on the ability to harness the elemental power of water. The pyramids may symbolize eternity, but Lake Moaris reveals the pragmatic brilliance that truly sustained Egypt, an empire built as much on foresight as on grandeur. The story of the Suez Canal doesn't begin in the 19th century. It starts nearly 4,000 years earlier with a pharaoh who dared to rewrite the map of Egypt. During the reign of Senasrit III, a ruler so determined to control trade that he personally led military campaigns into Nubia, engineers began digging a waterway that would become one of antiquity's most astonishing feats. Stretching over 100 kilometers, This ancient canal didn't just connect the Nile to the Red Sea, it reshaped the balance of power in the ancient world. Picture ships laden with frankincense from Punt and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan gliding through the desert, their cargo reaching Mediterranean markets in weeks instead of months. Recent core samples taken from the eastern delta tell a fascinating tale. Layers of sediment reveal where salt water from the Red Sea mingled with the Nile's freshwater, marking the canal's precise route. Even more telling are the fragments of pottery and ship timbers found along this path, debris from centuries of constant use. But the real proof lies in the inscriptions. A stela at the Temple of Karnak boasts how Senasrit's engineers made the desert into a river, describing a system of locks and basins that kept the waterway navigable even during low Nile seasons. Maintaining this marvel required an army of laborers. Papyrus records from the workers' village at Wadi Tumilat detail shifts of dredgers who cleared silt year-round, while teams of surveyors checked the canal's depth with marked poles. During the reign of Ramesses II, a particularly ambitious project widened the channel to accommodate warships, proof that this wasn't just a trade route but a strategic asset. When the Persian king Darius I conquered Egypt, he was so impressed by the canal that he ordered its restoration, leaving inscriptions in 4 languages proclaiming, "I commanded this waterway to be dug so that ships might sail from Egypt to Persia." Yet for all its brilliance, the canal's greatest enemy wasn't foreign invaders, it was the land itself. Over time, shifting sand dunes and silt buildup made maintenance nearly impossible. By the Ptolemaic era, crews were spending more time digging than sailing. The final blow came when a series of droughts lowered the Nile's water table, leaving entire sections bone dry. As the canal faded, so did Egypt's grip on Red Sea trade. Rival powers like the Nabateans seized the opportunity, rerouting caravans through Petra and cutting Egypt out of the profits. The lesson: this wasn't just a canal, it was a barometer of imperial power. When the water flowed, Egypt thrived as the middleman of continents. When it clogged, the kingdom's influence ebbed like a retreating tide. The modern Suez Canal may be a triumph of steel and dynamite, but its true ancestor was built with copper tools and sheer will, a reminder that even the grandest empires rise and fall on their ability to master the elements. On the wind-swept shores of the Red Sea, where the desert meets the water, lie the crumbling remains of harbors that once launched Egypt into the wider world. At Pharaonic, a port so remote even the Romans called it the edge of the earth, archaeologists have uncovered something extraordinary: massive stone piers designed to withstand monsoon winds, their surfaces still grooved by the ropes of ships that sailed to lands so distant they bordered on myth. This wasn't just a dock, it was a springboard to adventure where Egyptian sailors set course for Punt, a fabled kingdom of incense and gold whose exact location still puzzles historians today. Walk these ruins today and you'll find more than just stones. Preserved in the dry air are the very ropes that tied ships to these docks, their fibers still twisted as if waiting for the next voyage. Nearby, limestone anchors lie half-buried, some still bearing the chisel marks of the quarry workers who shaped them. But the real treasure, fragments of cedar planks, their wood grain telling a story of daring voyages. Analysis reveals these timbers came from Lebanon, proof that Egypt's maritime network stretched far beyond its borders, with materials shipped overland to these distant shores before being crafted into vessels sturdy enough to face the open ocean. The sailors who departed from these harbors faced challenges that would daunt modern navigators. Coral reefs lurked just beneath the surface, ready to tear hulls apart. Yet Egyptian pilots left clues to their mastery. A collection of star charts found at Murrah Gawassi's details how they used the constellations to guide them south during the winter monsoons. One papyrus even lists landmarks along the African coast, describing bays where fresh water could be found and warning of rocky outcrops where ships had been lost. And then there's the cargo. Excavations at Pharaonic have turned up leopard skulls, likely gifts for pharaohs, and heaps of peppercorns from India, spices that predate the Roman spice trade by centuries. Storage jars still bear the imprints of frankincense resin, so precious it was worth its weight in gold. But perhaps most telling are the humble finds: a child's toy boat carved from acacia wood, a sailor's sandal preserved in the mud. These ordinary objects whisper of the lives behind the legend, the families who waved goodbye as ships vanished over the horizon, the crews who spent months at sea trading for treasures their neighbors could scarcely imagine. What makes these ports truly remarkable isn't just their scale, but their endurance. For over 2,000 years, through dynasties and invasions, they kept Egypt connected to the pulse of global trade. When the pyramids were already ancient history, sailors from Pharaonic were still bringing back ivory from Africa and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. The Silk Road gets the glory, but these harbors were the original bridges between continents, proof that long before Marco Polo, Egypt's mariners were weaving a web of connections that stretched halfway around the world. The desert may have defined Egypt's borders, but it was the sea that shaped its destiny. High in the rugged mountains of the Sinai Peninsula, where the desert heat shimmers off the rocks, lies a labyrinth of tunnels that tell a surprising story, one where the fate of Egypt's maritime empire was forged not in shipyards but in mines. The turquoise-studded cliffs of Senasrit el-Qadim weren't just a source of precious gems. They hid something far more valuable to a civilization that lived by the water: copper. This metal, soft enough to shape yet strong enough to last, became the unsung hero of Egypt's naval dominance. Every axe that felled cedar in Lebanon, every chisel that shaped hull planks, every spear that defended the Nile shores began here, in these scorching tunnels where miners toiled under the watchful eye of Hathor, goddess of turquoise and protector of expeditions. The journey from rock to warship was a marvel of logistics. After smelting the raw ore in furnaces fueled by acacia wood, workers hammered the copper into ingots shaped like ox hides, portable, stackable, and ready for transport. But here's where the real ingenuity kicked in. These heavy metal slabs didn't trek across the desert by land, they traveled by water. Ancient dock ruins along the Gulf of Suez reveal how ships laden with copper hugged the coast, stopping at way stations where fresh crews waited to take over. One such outpost at Murrah Bay still bears the soot stains of smelting pits, where raw ore was partially refined before shipment to save weight. Copper's role went far beyond tools. When archaeologists examined the hull of a sunken vessel near Alexandria, they found something startling: sheets of copper nailed beneath the waterline. This wasn't just repair work, it was an early form of anti-fouling designed to keep shipworms from devouring the wood. The same metal that armed soldiers also protected the very ships that carried them. And when the mysterious sea peoples threatened Egypt's shores in 1200 BCE, it was copper that turned the tide. Inscriptions at Medinet Habu show Ramesses III's fleet outfitted with bronze-tipped arrows and grappling hooks, their edges sharpened to a lethal gleam by Sinai's bounty. But perhaps the most telling clue to copper's importance lies in the graffiti left by miners at Senasrit el-Qadim. Amidst the prayers to Hathor, crude sketches of ships adorned the tunnel walls, some with exaggerated sails, others with rows of oars. These weren't just doodles, they were blueprints. The same hands that hacked copper from the earth also understood its ultimate purpose: to build vessels that would carry Egypt's power across the waves. The pyramids may symbolize eternity, but it was these unassuming ingots hauled from desert mines to distant docks that kept an empire afloat. Buried beneath the Great Pyramid's shadow, 5 wooden boats lay disassembled in limestone pits, a fleet meant to carry Pharaoh Khufu into eternity. When archaeologists reassembled one of these vessels, they uncovered more than just ancient engineering. They found a mirror of the cosmos itself. The 43-meter-long ship's curved hull mirrored the crescent moon, while its papyrus-shaped stern echoed the primal mound of creation from Egyptian mythology. This wasn't mere transportation. It was a consecrated object, every measurement calibrated to align with the stars that would guide the pharaoh's soul across celestial waters. The materials told an equally sacred story. While the hull used local acacia wood associated with the goddess Hathor, the decking came from Lebanese cedar, a material so revered it was called the god's flesh. Shipwrights intentionally mixed these sacred woods, believing their combination would invoke divine protection. Even the ropes held spiritual significance. Instead of nails, which were known but considered profane for sacred vessels, craftsmen lashed the planks with 5,000 meters of rope made from Nile reeds. These fibers weren't just practical, they symbolized the intertwined strands of fate, their flexibility allowing the ship to breathe with the river's currents like a living creature. At the Temple of Karnak, wall carvings reveal an even more astonishing practice. When constructing the ceremonial barges of Ammon, priests performed rituals normally reserved for divine statues, anointing the prow with oils, dressing the mast in linen, and even feeding the vessel offerings. The most elaborate ships housed miniature shrines on their decks, complete with incense altars that perfumed the river air as they sailed. During the Opet festival, the god's golden barge would glide down the Nile accompanied by musicians, its route meticulously planned to align with solar events. The helmsman wasn't just a sailor but a priest, reading currents and stars as sacred texts. What modern eyes might see as mere shipbuilding techniques reveal a deeper truth. The Egyptians didn't separate the practical from the spiritual. The same lashing technique that kept boats flexible in rough waters also represented the unity of cosmic order. Cedar's natural resistance to rot wasn't just a material advantage, it symbolized eternal life. Even the act of caulking seams with beeswax carried double meaning, as bees were emblems of kingship. These floating temples didn't just transport goods and people, they carried an entire worldview where every splash of an oar echoed the rhythm of creation itself. On the sun-baked cliffs near Luxor, a series of weathered carvings tell a silent story, one that modern eyes almost missed. These aren't the usual temple scenes of gods and pharaohs, but something far more intriguing, detailed sketches of boats sailing a waterway that doesn't exist today. Known as the Farshout inscriptions, these ancient etchings show vessels with billowing sails navigating what appears to be a wide river, complete with fish swimming beneath their hulls and laborers unloading cargo on vanished shores. The mystery: this watercourse hasn't flowed for thousands of years. Geologists armed with ground-penetrating radar have begun piecing together the puzzle. What they've uncovered beneath the sand is nothing short of astonishing. A fossil riverbed, its meandering path still visible in satellite imagery, cutting a ghostly line through what's now barren desert. Core samples reveal layers of silt and freshwater shells, proof that this was once a thriving tributary of the Nile. But here's where it gets fascinating. The inscriptions don't just show boats, they depict specific types of vessels, some designed for shallow waters, others with high prows meant for navigating strong currents. This wasn't random artwork, it was a maritime manual, a guide to routes that vanished when the climate shifted. One particular scene holds the key. A procession of priests carries a sacred statue from a riverside temple to a waiting ship, suggesting this waterway had religious significance. Yet nearby, another carving shows scribes tallying stacks of grain sacks, evidence of bustling commerce. So was this a ceremonial path, a trade artery, or both? The answer may lie in the river's timing. Sediment analysis shows it flowed strongest during the Old Kingdom, when pyramid construction was at its peak. Coincidence? Unlikely. This lost route would have provided a direct path to transport limestone from quarries to construction sites, bypassing miles of arduous overland hauling. The real revelation comes when you overlay this ancient waterway onto modern maps. It creates a shortcut between key archaeological sites, one that explains how massive stone blocks could have been moved with such precision. But perhaps most striking is what the Farshout inscriptions tell us about resilience. When the river dried up, the carvings show adaptations, smaller boats pulled by oxen, then later, caravans of donkeys. Egypt's genius wasn't just in building monuments, but in rewriting its maritime playbook as the land itself transformed. The desert may have reclaimed this river, but its memory lives on in these cryptic lines, a testament to an empire that didn't just navigate waters, but mastered the art of change itself. Punt wasn't just a trading partner, it was the stuff of legend, a land so rich its name became synonymous with exotic luxury in ancient Egypt. Imagine the scene when Hatshepsut's fleet returned after months at sea, their holds bursting with treasures that would make any pharaoh's heart race. Stacked high were fragrant mounds of frankincense resin, so precious it was burned only in temples to honor the gods. Bundles of ebony logs, black as night and harder than stone, arrived for artisans to carve into statues fit for palaces. Then came the live baboons, their screeches echoing through the docks as handlers unloaded cages. These weren't just curiosities, but sacred animals believed to embody Thoth, the god of wisdom. The murals at Deir el-Bahari tell this story in vivid color, showing tall Puntite houses on stilts, their roofs woven from palm leaves, while bearded chieftains proffer gold rings and giraffe tails. But what these paintings don't reveal is the real mystery. Where exactly was this land of plenty? For over a century, scholars have debated whether Punt lay in modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, or even Yemen. Recent breakthroughs come from an unexpected source: the mummified remains of those very baboons. DNA analysis matches them to species native to the Horn of Africa, while isotopic studies of their teeth confirm they drank water from the Eritrean highlands. Yet the shipping routes tell a more daring tale. At Murrah, archaeologists found limestone anchors and ship timbers bearing the scars of saltwater corrosion, evidence of open sea voyages, not cautious coastal hopping. The Egyptians weren't just traders, they were pioneers, braving the monsoon winds to cross the Red Sea's widest points. One recovered logbook details a navigational trick. Crews would release birds to find land, much like the biblical Noah's dove. If the bird returned, they sailed on. If not, they'd found their bearing. The real shock came when researchers tested residues inside jars from Puntite cargo. Traces of myrrh and cinnamon spices that shouldn't have existed in Africa suggest Punt wasn't just a destination, but a hub in a vast network stretching to India. This redefines Egypt's role in ancient globalization. Forget the image of an isolated river civilization. These finds prove Egyptian sailors were middlemen in a trade web that spanned continents. Hatshepsut's temple boasts that her expedition returned with the marvels of Punt, but the greatest marvel might be the journey itself. To sail into the unknown, guided only by stars and instinct, required a courage that rivals the pyramid's construction. The gold and incense have long since vanished, but the legacy remains a testament to Egypt's forgotten age of exploration, when its horizons stretched far beyond the desert's edge. Beneath the turquoise waters off the coast of Turkey, the wreck of the Uluburan ship lies like a time capsule from the Bronze Age, its cargo telling a story that rewrites what we know about Egypt's reach across the Mediterranean. When divers first brushed away the seabed silt, they uncovered a king's ransom 10 tons of copper ingots stacked like bricks, gleaming lumps of tin from distant mines, and glass ingots in colors so vibrant they still look wet. But the real surprise, scarabs bearing the name of Nefertiti, proof this vessel traded directly with Egypt's royal court. This wasn't just commerce, it was high-stakes diplomacy conducted over waves, where a single ship could carry wealth equal to a small kingdom's treasury. Egypt's hunger for Mediterranean goods went far beyond luxury. Lebanese cedar wasn't just prized for its fragrance, its straight, sturdy trunks were the backbone of Egypt's navy. At the dockyards of Perennefer, shipwrights layered this imported wood with local acacia, creating hybrid hulls that could withstand both Nile currents and Mediterranean storms. Meanwhile, Cretan potters tailored their designs specifically for Egyptian tastes, producing cups painted with papyrus motifs that became status symbols in Thebes' elite circles. Even mundane items like olive oil arrived in customized containers, distinctive Canaanite jars, that let customs officials quickly assess duties at a glance. But trade this lucrative attracted more than merchants. Along Egypt's western coast, the fortress of Zawi, yet el-Rakam still stands sentinel, its walls scarred by ancient attacks. Here, archaeologists found clay tablets warning of Sea People raids, along with storerooms packed with Greek and Cypriot goods likely salvaged from intercepted pirate ships. The pharaohs didn't just defend their shores, they turned the coastline into a carefully managed checkpoint system. Lookout towers relayed smoke signals when ships approached, while fortified harbors like Qam el-Hisn forced foreign vessels into single-file channels where scribes could inspect every cargo. The Mediterranean's greatest gift to Egypt, though, wasn't goods but ideas. A fresco in Avaris Palace depicts Minoan bull leapers performing alongside Egyptian dancers, while medical papyri from the same era include Cypriot remedies for seasickness. When Egyptian artists began experimenting with vibrant blue pigments, the technique came from Mycenaean glassmakers. This cultural exchange flowed both ways. A statue base in Crete bears hieroglyphs praising Pharaoh Amenhotep III, and Sardinian warriors buried their chiefs with Egyptian-style faience amulets. What emerges from these scattered clues is a vision of the Mediterranean not as separate civilizations orbiting one another, but as an interconnected web where Egyptian grain fed Aegean cities, Anatolian silver paid Theban artisans, and Cypriot copper armed Pharaoh's armies. The Uluburan's sinking was a tragedy for its crew, but for us, it's a revelation proof that 3,000 years before container ships, Egypt had already turned the sea into a highway for a globalized world. The Mediterranean world trembled as wave after wave of mysterious invaders crashed against Egypt's shores around 1200 BCE, a force so destructive they left no cities, only ruins in their wake. Ancient scribes called them simply the Sea Peoples, but these weren't ordinary pirates. Their attacks came like a perfect storm, coordinated strikes from Libya to Syria, targeting not just wealth but the very lifelines of empire, ports, shipyards, and grain stores. At Medinet Habu, Ramesses III's temple walls tell the story in chilling detail. Warships with lion-headed prows lock in battle, Egyptian archers firing volleys into the chaos as enemy vessels burn. But look closer and you'll spot something alarming. The pharaoh's fleet is outmatched, their ships smaller, their tactics outdated against these seaborne raiders who fight like nothing Egypt had ever seen. What made the Sea Peoples so devastating wasn't just their ferocity, it was timing. Recent studies of sediment cores reveal a climate catastrophe unfolding across the Mediterranean. Droughts parched Anatolia's farmlands while earthquakes shattered Mycenaean palaces. As famine spread, desperate populations took to the seas, becoming both refugees and raiders. But here's the twist. Egypt's real vulnerability lay in its rigid maritime systems. For centuries, the kingdom had relied on the same trusted ship designs, sturdy Nile barges and coastal traders, while ignoring innovations like the Sea People's agile, oar-driven galleys. When crisis came, the empire's ports, built for peaceful commerce, became death traps. At the fortress of Zawiya el-Rakam, archaeologists found warehouses burned to the ground, their contents looted or smashed, including Cretan pottery still stacked as if awaiting customs inspection. Rames's eventual victory came at a terrible cost. His inscriptions boast of stacking enemy corpses like mountains, but the truth was grimmer. To repel the invaders, Egypt had to reinvent its navy almost overnight. Workers felled entire cedar forests to build a new fleet, while conscripts from Nubia trained with foreign mercenaries to master close-quarters combat. The Medinet Habu reliefs hint at these desperate adaptations. Egyptian ships now sport raised fighting platforms, and soldiers wield captured Sea People's swords. Even trade routes were rewritten overnight. Abandoning vulnerable Red Sea ports, Egypt pivoted to overland caravans, a move that would later make cities like Petra fabulously wealthy. The real lesson of the Sea Peoples isn't about invasion, it's about inflexibility. For all its maritime prowess, Egypt had grown complacent, assuming the Mediterranean would always play by its rules. When the rules changed, only radical adaptation saved the kingdom. The same currents that once carried gold and incense now brought chaos, proving that even the mightiest empires are just one storm away from disaster. The Pharaohs survived, but their near collapse whispers a warning across millennia. Mastery of the seas means more than building ships, it demands the courage to sail into the unknown. Picture an Egyptian sailor standing on the deck of his wooden ship as darkness falls over the Red Sea, no landmarks in sight, no compass to point the way, just an endless stretch of water merging with the night sky. Yet he isn't lost. To him, the heavens aren't just a spectacle, they're a map painted in constellations. The star Sirius, known as Sopdet to the Egyptians, rises just before the Nile's annual flood, its appearance signaling both agricultural renewal and the safest window for sailing. By tracking its position alongside other stars like Orion, navigators could chart a course as accurately as any modern GPS. Tomb paintings at Deir el-Bahari depict this celestial dance, showing sailors with arms outstretched toward the sky, measuring angles between stars and the horizon using nothing but their hands, a living, breathing sextant. But stars alone couldn't account for the sea's fickleness. That's where nature's other clues came in. During monsoon season, sailors observed the flight patterns of birds, especially the African spoonbill, which migrated predictably between the Nile and the southern Red Sea. Spotting these birds at dawn meant land was near, even if invisible over the horizon. Currents, too, became road signs. The Red Sea's northward summer flow and southward winter pulse created natural highways, allowing ships to ride the water's rhythm with minimal effort. A broken pottery shard found at Murrah bears a crude sketch of waves with annotations, likely a captain's record of seasonal currents. Depth was another puzzle solved with elegant simplicity. A wooden model from a Middle Kingdom tomb shows a sailor lowering a stone-weighted rope, its knots marking intervals. When the knots vanished at a certain count, he knew the shallows were near. This same technique appears in a miraculous survival tale. A shipwrecked crew recounted how they used their sounding rope to find a sandbank, saving themselves by wading to shore at low tide. Yet the most fascinating tool wasn't physical at all. It was myth-turned navigational wisdom. The story of Osiris sailing the celestial river in his bark wasn't just a religious tale, it encoded star paths used after dark. Temples doubled as observatories, their aligned doorways framing specific stars at key dates. A priest at Edfu noted how the god Horus's eye, the star Fomalhaut, appeared at a certain temple pillar when it was time to sail to Punt. This blend of observation and tradition gave Egyptian sailors an edge no rival could match. While others clung to coastlines, they ventured into open waters, trusting the cosmos to guide them. The sea wasn't a barrier, it was a mirror reflecting the heavens above and the ingenuity of those who learned to read both. When the Nile swelled each summer, transforming Egypt into a shimmering inland sea, pharaohs didn't just see fertile fields, they saw a tactical opportunity. Those floodwaters, which modern eyes might view as mere agricultural blessings, became the lifeblood of Egypt's naval dominance. Ancient records from the reign of Amenem had the first reveal a startling detail. His surprise invasion of Nubia wasn't launched during the dry season like previous campaigns, but at peak flood, when the river's surge carried his warships over sandbars that normally blocked passage. This wasn't just convenience, it was strategic genius. While enemies anticipated attacks along predictable routes, Egypt's fleet could suddenly appear where rivers had been impassable weeks earlier, turning geography itself into a weapon. The logistics behind these flood-powered maneuvers were staggering. Temple accounts from Karnak describe how officials timed troop movements to the rising waters, with scribes tracking flood levels using nilometers, stone staircases marked with measurements that functioned like ancient tide gauges. When the water reached the fourth step, it signaled that channels leading to key fortresses were navigable. At the seventh step, even the shallowest tributaries became highways for supply barges. One particularly vivid papyrus from the Middle Kingdom details how engineers built temporary floating docks from bundled reeds, allowing entire regiments to board ships in areas that lacked proper harbors. But the real masterstroke was how Egypt turned its seasonal abundance into geopolitical leverage. During high flood years, the pharaohs stockpiled grain not just for their people, but as diplomatic currency. A cache of letters found at El Amarna shows foreign rulers pleading for Egyptian wheat during their own drought shipments that always came with strings attached. The Hittite king Hattusili III wrote desperately, "Send me grain so my people do not perish," a request Pharaoh Merneptah granted only after securing favorable trade terms. Controlling the flood's bounty meant controlling the Mediterranean's hunger. Yet reliance on nature's rhythm carried risks. When the floods failed, as they did during the reign of Pepi II, the consequences were catastrophic. Sandbars re-emerged, stranding warships like beached whales. A stark account from this era describes sailors dismantling their own vessels to drag them across mudflats, while garrisons waited months for supplies that never came. The lesson was clear: Egypt's maritime power ebbed and flowed with the Nile itself. What emerges from these records isn't just a story of survival, but of calculated opportunism. The pharaohs didn't merely adapt to the floods, they weaponized them. By aligning military campaigns with high water, they turned seasonal chaos into orderly conquest. When drought struck, they pivoted, building canals to redirect what little flow remained. The Nile's pulse didn't just feed Egypt, it fueled an empire's ambition, proving that true power lies not in fighting nature, but in learning to ride its currents. Beneath the waves near Alexandria's ancient harbour, a grid of stone walls lies half buried in the seabed, not the remains of a palace or temple, but something far more practical. These are the ghostly outlines of Ptolemaic-era dry docks, where Egypt's warships were hauled ashore for repairs. Unlike simple beaching spots used by other ancient cultures, these facilities were marvels of hydro-engineering. Loose gates carved from limestone could seal off entire basins, allowing workers to drain seawater and expose hulls for maintenance. Imagine the scene, crews swarming over triremes in these artificial canyons, patching planks with Lebanese cedar while carpenters replaced oars in the shade of towering stone quays. The real ingenuity lies in how these docks adapted older Egyptian techniques. Centuries before the Ptolemies, workers near the Giza Plateau had built massive limestone ramps leading to the Nile, structures once thought to be for dragging pyramid stones. But recent excavations revealed traces of bitumen, a waterproofing tar used on ship hulls clinging to these slopes. Now scholars suspect these were slipways, where sleds laden with newly built vessels could slide smoothly into the water. The same civilization that perfected stone masonry also devised ways to launch ships as effortlessly as lowering a sarcophagus into a tomb. What set Egypt's shipyards apart wasn't just scale, it was foresight. At Ain Sakna on the Red Sea, archaeologists uncovered a 3rd millennium BCE dockyard with a clever trick. Parallel channels allowed multiple ships to be serviced simultaneously, while a central basin collected flood debris to keep the workspace clear. Inscriptions nearby list materials stockpiled for repairs, everything from spare sails to pre-measured rope coils, proving these weren't makeshift operations but planned industrial hubs. The most telling detail: shipwrights left their marks. At Wadi el-Jarf, workers etched measurements and assembly diagrams directly onto limestone cliffs, an ancient dry erase board for drafting hull designs. Nearby, a pottery shard bears a frantic note about a delayed copper shipment for nail making, reminding us that even in the age of pyramids, logistics could be as challenging as the construction itself. These sites blur the line between monumental and maritime engineering, revealing a culture that applied the same precision to floating vessels as it did to eternal tombs. The dry docks near Alexandria didn't emerge from nowhere. They were the culmination of 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom, where every innovation in stonework found its parallel in wood and water. Among the bustling docks of ancient Thebes, where the scent of cedar and spices mingled with the river's damp air, a merchant named Jehuti scratched his seal into a papyrus contract, a deal that would send his ships laden with Nubian gold down the Nile to trade for Aegean bronze. He wasn't a pharaoh's official nor a temple scribe, but something far more intriguing. One of Egypt's merchant kings, a private trader whose ambitions stretched as wide as the horizon. The title, Overseer of Ships, wasn't just ceremonial. It marked the elite of a thriving commercial class who operated in the shadows of empire, turning personal profit into national prosperity. Papyrus scraps from the village of Deir el-Medina reveal how these entrepreneurs worked. A typical contract might stipulate that a shipowner borrow 20 deben of copper, about £4, to fund a voyage to Byblos, repaying the loan with interest in Lebanese cedar upon return. But here's the twist: clauses often included risk-sharing agreements. If storms sank the ship, the debt was forgiven. This wasn't just early banking, it was a form of maritime insurance, proving how deeply commerce was woven into daily life. One particularly shrewd trader, a woman named Ipi, even diversified her ventures, owning shares in multiple ships to spread risk, much like a modern stock portfolio. The goods these merchants moved weren't just luxuries. A ledger from El Amarna lists everyday cargoes: jars of fish sauce from the Delta, bundles of linen from Memphis, even pre-measured sacks of medicinal herbs. These weren't destined for palaces, but for market stalls where barbers, potters, and farmers haggled over prices. At the Red Sea port of Murrah, archaeologists found pottery shards inscribed with memos like 200 jars of olive oil held for inspection, showing how tightly regulated even private trade could be. Yet the real power of these merchants lay in their connections. A tomb painting in a swan shows a Nubian chieftain presenting gold rings to an Egyptian trader named Harkaf, not to a pharaoh. This was commerce as diplomacy, where personal relationships opened doors no army could breach. When Drought struck Canaan, it was these merchants, not royal envoys, who negotiated grain shipments in exchange for desperately needed timber. Perhaps the most telling discovery comes from a shipwreck near Cyprus. Amidst the shattered amphorae lay a clay tablet in Egyptian hieratic script, a private letter between merchants complaining about delayed payments. The handwriting is rushed, the tone exasperatedly human. These weren't faceless cogs in a state machine, but individuals hustling, scheming, and sometimes failing, all to keep the lifeblood of empire flowing. The pyramids may have been built by pharaohs, but the mortar holding Egypt together was mixed by merchants. The sun disk Aten blazes across the hulls of strange, sleek ships in the carvings at Amarna, vessels unlike any other in Egyptian art. With their curved prows and minimalist designs, they seem to float halfway between reality and symbol. Was this Akhenaten's forgotten fleet, built to serve his revolutionary sun cult, or were these ghost ships meant only to carry the pharaoh's radical ideas across the cosmic river of the heavens? The answer, like so much about this heretic king, lies in the shifting sands between myth and pragmatism. Excavations along the Nile bend near Amarna reveal tantalizing clues. A series of stone jetties, their surfaces worn smooth by ropes, suggest a busy waterfront serving the new capital. More telling are the storage magazines nearby, their floors still stained with residues of imported cedar resin, a key ingredient for waterproofing hulls. But it's the graffiti that truly captivates. On a limestone cliff overlooking the river, laborers scratched crude sketches of ships alongside prayers to the Aten, some with odd details, sun discs mounted on masts, or cabins with open roofs as if designed for solar worship. The debate among scholars hinges on a single, stunning relief in the Amarna tombs. It shows Akhenaten and Nefertiti standing aboard a solar barge, but with eerie deviations from tradition. Gone are the falcon-headed prow and papyrus-shaped stern, replaced by a streamlined design that seems built for speed rather than ritual. Most striking. The oarsmen face backward, rowing toward the sun instead of with it. Was this artistic license or evidence of actual ships redesigned to reflect Atenist doctrine? Maritime archaeologists point to a curious find at Tel el-Borg in the Sinai, a ship's timber bearing traces of yellow pigment and a partial Aten cartouche. Too small for a full vessel, it might have been a model used by shipwrights experimenting with new designs. Meanwhile, clay tablets from Amarna's archives mention the swift boats of the living Aten, dispatched to collect offerings from loyal cities. Whether these ships sailed physical waters or theological ones, their legacy is undeniable. Akhenaten's reign proved that even a pharaoh who rejected the old gods couldn't escape the Nile's practical demands. His revolution needed grain from the delta, turquoise from Sinai, and diplomatic gifts from foreign lands, all carried on the backs of vessels. The Amarna carvings may depict a celestial fleet, but the silt-stained docks tell another truth. No ruler, no matter how visionary, could build a new world without first mastering the art of the waves. When Augustus annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, he didn't just claim pyramids and temples, he seized the Mediterranean's most sophisticated shipping network. Rome's new province became an imperial lifeline, its grain fleets feeding 1 million mouths in the capital, while its ports funneled eastern luxuries to elite villas. But here's what history books often miss. Rome didn't replace Egypt's maritime systems, it supercharged them. The same Nile that had nourished pharaohs now fueled an empire stretching from Britain to Babylon, proving Egypt's waterways were timeless engines of power. Take the legendary grain shipments. Every August, as the Nile's floodwaters peaked, a fleet of over 100 vessels, some capable of carrying 1,000 tons, set sail from Alexandria's Grand Harbour. These weren't the cramped galleys of Roman war fleets, but broad-beamed freighters designed specifically for the Nile's quirks. Their flat bottoms allowed them to navigate shallow floodplains during harvest season, while reinforced bows withstood the river's unpredictable currents. Papyrus manifests from Oxyrhynchus reveal the staggering scale. One convoy delivered enough grain to bake bread for every Roman citizen for 2 months. Yet the real marvel was the infrastructure behind this flow. At Babylon Fort near modern Cairo, archaeologists uncovered a hydraulic masterpiece, a series of lock gates that functioned like ancient Panama Canal locks. When the Nile ran low, these gates pooled water into compartments, raising ships step by step to higher elevations. A surviving engineer's report boasts how the system cut travel time from Thebes to Alexandria by 8 days, turning seasonal bottlenecks into smooth sailing. Meanwhile, the desert canals Pharaohs had dug centuries earlier saw new life. Roman engineers dredged and widened the Nile Red Sea link, creating a direct route for spices from Arabia and gems from India. The ports along this revived waterway buzzed with activity. At Pharaonic, excavations uncovered a customs house where scribes recorded shipments in Greek, Latin, and Tamil, a linguistic tapestry reflecting global trade. Most striking, the lighthouses. While Alexandria's pharaohs symbolized the city, smaller beacon towers dotted the coast, their polished bronze mirrors reflecting firelight to guide night traffic. One ship's log found near Myos Hormos notes how captains timed voyages to coincide with full moons, doubling visibility. Rome's genius lay in recognizing that Egypt's true wealth wasn't in its monuments but in its maritime muscle memory. The same shipwrights who once built vessels for pharaonic expeditions now crafted grain freighters for imperial anony. The scribes who tallied tribute for Thutmose III adapted their record-keeping for Roman tax quotas. Even the Nile's floods, once seen as gifts from Osiris, were now measured with scientific precision nilometer readings sent directly to Rome's grain officials. The ultimate testament to this continuity, a humble wooden tablet found in a Pompeii warehouse, dated to 79 CE. It lists Egyptian grain deliveries interrupted by Vesuvius eruption. The handwriting is Latin, but the units of measurement are cubits and hecats, echoes of pharaonic mathematics, surviving in the heart of the Roman machine. Egypt's waters had outlasted dynasties and conquerors, whispering the same truth to every power that dared to harness them. Control the river, and you control the world. Deep in the cedar forests of Turkey and the lake beds of Ethiopia, nature kept silent records of catastrophe, tree rings narrowing to hairline cracks, sediment layers turning to dust. These unassuming clues tell a story that toppled empires, the great droughts that strangled Egypt's lifeblood. When the Nile's floods weakened around 2200 BCE, it wasn't just crops that suffered. The entire maritime machine, ports, canals, fleets began grinding to a halt as water levels plummeted. At the Red Sea harbor of Murrah, archaeologists found docks abandoned mid-construction, their ramps leading not to water but to sun-baked mudflats. Ship timbers still bearing tool marks were left to rot, as if the sea itself had retreated overnight. The scale of this disaster becomes clear in temple inscriptions from the First Intermediate period. A priest's desperate plea at Karnak describes ships dragging bellies through sand where waves once danced, while tax records show entire fishing villages paying their dues in salt, a telltale sign their boats could no longer reach the Nile's dwindling channels. But the most chilling evidence comes from beyond Egypt's borders. Ice cores from Greenland preserve sulfuric acid spikes, dating to this era footprints of massive volcanic eruptions that likely triggered global climate shifts. When Mount Thera exploded around 1600 BCE, its ash blotted out the sun for years, disrupting monsoon patterns that fed the Nile sources. As the waters fell, so did Egypt's control over its maritime networks. The once bustling port of Avaris became a ghost town, its harbor silting up until even fishing skiffs couldn't navigate the shallows. Upstream, the strategic fortress of Buhan on the Nubian border found itself stranded miles from the river's new course, its moat reduced to a cracked ditch. Rebellions erupted as grain shipments failed. A scribe's ledger from Thebes lists 41 consecutive days without the expected flour rations. At the delta city of Menz, archaeologists uncovered mass graves filled with skeletons showing signs of starvation, many clutching tiny clay boat amulets as if begging the gods to restore the waters. Yet Egypt's response reveals its ingenuity. In the Fayum oasis, engineers repurposed abandoned quarry channels to create an emergency irrigation network, while desperate sailors dredged ancient canals forgotten since the Old Kingdom. One remarkable papyrus from El-Lahan details how a resourceful captain named Keti lashed empty wine jars beneath his ship's hull to increase buoyancy in the shallows, an early form of makeshift ballast. Even the pharaohs adapted, with Amenemhat III shifting his navy's focus from Mediterranean trade to securing what little Nile traffic remained. The lesson written in these dried-up riverbeds and sunken docks isn't just about environmental vulnerability, it's about the fragility of connections. A single decade of drought could unravel maritime networks built over centuries, leaving ships stranded like relics in a desert. The pyramids still stood, but without the Nile's lifeblood, Egypt's true source of power. Its ability to move, trade, and project influence across water crumbled like a papyrus scroll left in the sun. Climate shifts didn't just lower water levels, they exposed how tightly civilization's fate was tied to the whims of weather and current. When the rains failed, even an empire that mastered river and sea found itself at the mercy of forces no pharaoh could command. From high above the Egyptian desert, satellites capture more than just sand. They reveal the ghostly imprints of a lost world. In the vast expanse west of Luxor, where tourists now snap photos of towering temples, NASA radar once detected something astonishing: the faint but unmistakable outline of a sprawling harbor, its basin long since buried under centuries of silt. This wasn't just any port, it was the heart of Thebes' maritime network, a hub where ceremonial barges and grain ships once jostled for space along canals now invisible to the naked eye. The Theban Harbours and Waterscapes Survey didn't just find a forgotten dock, they uncovered an entire aquatic landscape, proving that what we call landlocked ruins were once islands in a watery maze. The magic lies in the technology. Multispectral imaging, a technique that analyzes light wavelengths beyond human vision, can pinpoint where ancient water altered the soil's chemistry, painting a map of vanished channels in vivid false color. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar sends pulses through the earth, bouncing back signals that reveal buried stonework with centimeter precision. At the site of ancient Memphis, these tools exposed a monumental harbor wall stretching nearly half a kilometer, its limestone blocks still aligned as if waiting for the next flood. Archaeologists call this X-ray vision for history, and it's rewriting textbooks. Where scholars once assumed desert routes dominated trade, we now see a Nile-connected Venice of the sands, with arteries branching to quarries, temples, and necropolises. One of the most startling discoveries came from a dried-up canal near Abusia. Satellite thermal imaging showed unnatural temperature variations in the soil, traces of organic material that turned out to be the remains of a Pharaonic-era shipyard. Scattered around the site were fragments of cedar and acacia, their wood grain still visible, along with tool marks from adzes used to shape hulls, but the real revelation. The canal's alignment, it didn't just connect to the Nile, it intersected with a previously unknown tributary, creating a shortcut to the Giza Plateau. Suddenly, the mystery of how pyramid builders moved millions of stone blocks makes new sense. They had a hidden water highway. Digital reconstructions bring these findings to life. Using LiDAR scans and 3D modeling, researchers at the University of Chicago recreated the Abusia waterway in stunning detail. Watch the simulation, and you'll see virtual ships gliding past ramps where workers loaded limestone, their reflections shimmering in waters that evaporated 4,000 years ago. These aren't just pretty visuals, they're solving long-standing puzzles. When the model factored in seasonal flood data, it revealed why certain quarries were favored over others. Their access channels stayed navigable even in dry years. The implications stretch far beyond Egypt. Similar satellite surveys in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley are uncovering parallel networks, suggesting a Bronze Age aquatic internet of trade routes. But Egypt's case stands out because of its sheer ambition. The latest scans at Wadi el-Jarf, home to the world's oldest known harbour, show not just docks, but an entire support complex with bakeries, barracks, and even a medical clinic. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a floating city designed to keep sailors healthy and fed during months-long voyages. Perhaps the most poignant discovery came from a drone survey near Aswan. High-resolution cameras spotted subtle depressions in the bedrock, the worn footsteps of countless laborers who hauled ships across a stretch of rapids when the Nile ran too low. The path, now called the Pharaohs' Dragway, bears grooves from hulls slid on lubricated logs, along with fragments of ropes made from twisted papyrus. These silent markers testify to an era when human muscle and ingenuity bridged nature's gaps, turning obstacles into opportunities. As satellites keep scanning and algorithms grow sharper, one truth emerges. Egypt's maritime past isn't buried, it's merely hidden, waiting for the right tools to bring it back to the surface. Every pixel processed, every radar echo interpreted, adds another piece to the puzzle. The deserts we see today were once alive with the sound of lapping waves and creaking oars, a reminder that civilizations rise not just on what they build, but on how they move. And in that movement captured now in the glow of satellite imagery, we find a story far grander than stones alone could ever tell. On the banks of the Nile, where the desert heat shimmers above the water, a team of archaeologists and shipwrights are bending wood the way it hasn't been bent in 4,000 years. The Abydos boat project isn't just studying history, they're resurrecting it plank by plank, using the same tools and techniques that once sent Pharaoh's fleets across the waves. Their goal, to answer a question that scrolls and temples never could: just how far could ancient Egyptian ships really go when pushed to their limits? The project began with a discovery that defied expectations: 14 buried boats near the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, their wooden hulls dismantled but perfectly preserved in the dry sand. These weren't full-sized vessels but ceremonial models, each about 20 meters long. Yet their construction was anything but symbolic. The planks were stitched together with miles of hemp rope, a technique modern engineers initially dismissed as too fragile for open water. But when the team replicated the design, lashing acacia planks with hand-twisted ropes soaked in resin, they got a shock. The hull flexed like a living thing, riding waves with a resilience that rigid, nailed ships couldn't match. Putting these replicas to the test revealed even more surprises. On a trial voyage down the Nile, the crew discovered that the seemingly primitive steering oars, two massive paddles mounted on the stern, allowed for razor-sharp turns in narrow channels. Meanwhile, the flat-bottomed design, once criticized for being unstable, proved ideal for skimming over sandbars that would ground deeper-hulled Mediterranean ships. But the real challenge came when they ventured beyond the river. In a daring expedition mimicking the route to Punt, the crew battled Red Sea currents with nothing but the stars and a replica of the ancient starboard tablet, a wooden navigation aid etched with celestial markers. Against all odds, the stitched hull held firm, even when waves crashed over the deck. What's emerging from these experiments is a radical rethink of Egyptian seafaring. The boat's lightweight design made them perfect for portaging, being dismantled and carried overland between waterways, a tactic hinted at in tomb paintings showing sled-mounted vessels. And those ceremonial models buried at Abydos, they may have been blueprints for the afterlife, but their engineering was deadly serious. One team member described sailing the replica as like riding a leaf. You feel every ripple, but somehow you never tip. The most profound lesson, though, isn't about technology, it's about people. Modern sailors wearing replica linen loincloths and sandals quickly learned why ancient crews worked in shifts. The unrelenting sun turned the deck into a griddle. Yet they also discovered the ingenuity of solutions lost to time. A woven reed mat draped over the mast created instant shade, while a clay pot of wet sand placed near the steering oars kept drinking water cool through evaporation. These weren't just boats, they were floating ecosystems of human adaptation. As the Abydos team prepares for their next voyage, a crossing to Crete to test Minoan trade route theories, their work echoes far beyond academia. Every snapped rope and splintered oar teaches us something new about the sailors who shaped history without compasses or charts. The pyramids may stand as monuments to eternity, but these fragile, resurrected boats remind us that Egypt's true genius lay in its ability to move, to adapt, and to conquer horizons we once thought impossible. The debate over ancient Egypt's maritime prowess isn't just academic, it strikes at the heart of how we understand the civilization's power. On one side, scholars like Professor John Cooper point to temple reliefs and diplomatic letters showing Egyptian pharaohs routinely hiring Phoenician and Minoan ships for long-distance trade. A cache of clay tablets from Amarna reveals how desperate Egyptian officials were to secure foreign vessels during grain shortages, writing, "Send us ships from Elachia, Cyprus, for our own cannot brave the winter seas." Even the legendary voyage to Punt, immortalized in Hatshepsut's temple, may have relied on Nubian navigators, their expertise etched into the detailed star charts found near the Red Sea coast. But other researchers push back fiercely. Dr. Cheryl Ward's reconstruction of the Punt ship using ancient techniques proved that Egyptian vessels could handle open water, their stitched hulls flexing through waves that would shatter rigid Mediterranean designs. The lack of deep-sea wrecks, she argues, isn't proof of coastal hugging, it's a quirk of preservation. Unlike the stone-laden Roman ships that sank intact, Egyptian wooden boats, lashed with organic ropes, would have disintegrated in deep currents. Recent sonar surveys near the Nile delved to support this, faint outlines of what may be shipwrecks buried under millennia of silt, their wooden skeletons long dissolved but their cargo still detectable as magnetic anomalies. The controversy deepens when we examine shipbuilding itself. At the Ain Sokhna shipyard, archaeologists found cedar planks marked with both Egyptian hieratic measurements and Cretan, symbols evidence of cultural blending or foreign labor. Some argue these mixed markings reveal a dependence on imported expertise, while others see them as proof of Egypt's adaptive genius, absorbing the best techniques from every shore. Even the famous Wadi el-Jarf harbor logs stirred disagreement. While they document impressive maritime organization, skeptics note the absence of any records describing voyages beyond the Red Sea. Underlying these clashes is a bigger question. Does maritime power require deep water fleets, or is mastery of riverine and coastal trade enough? Egypt's wealth came from controlling choke points, the Nile's tributaries, the delta's harbors, the Suez Isthmus, not from patrolling the Mediterranean like later Phoenician or Greek navies. The discovery of fortified way stations along the Levantine coast suggests a different model, not an empire of conquest, but a network of secured trade nodes. Perhaps Egypt's true naval innovation wasn't the ship, but the system, the docks, the canals, the warehouses that turned geography into destiny. What's at stake isn't just historical accuracy, but how we define influence. If Egypt's brilliance lay in leveraging others' ships while keeping its hands on the tiller of trade, does that diminish its achievements or reveal a different kind of genius? The answer may lie in the pottery shards scattered from Crete to Kush, all stamped with the same tax collector's mark. Whether on Egyptian hulls or foreign decks, the cargo reached its destination and the empire grew rich. The sea cares little for flags. It rewards those who understand its rhythms, and Egypt's pulse beat in time with the tides for 3,000 years. Ancient Egypt's mastery of water wasn't just about survival. It was a high-stakes balancing act between human ingenuity and nature's whims. When the Nile's floods dwindled during the Old Kingdom, engineers didn't just pray for rain. They dug vast catchment basins like the ones at Lake Moaris, turning seasonal scarcity into a managed resource. Fast forward 4,000 years, and the challenges are eerily familiar. Today's Aswan Dam, a modern colossus of concrete, echoes Pharaonic ambition, but with a critical difference. Where ancient systems worked with the river's natural rhythms, our reliance on rigid controls might be setting the stage for catastrophe. Satellite images reveal how the dam's sediment traps are starving the delta of fertile silt, a problem the ancients avoided by designing canals that flushed themselves clean during floods. The genius of Egypt's irrigation lay in its simplicity and adaptability. Farmers used shadows counterweighted buckets to lift water with minimal effort, while zigzagging canals slowed currents to prevent erosion. Compare that to today's massive pumping stations along the Nile, which guzzle energy and collapse during power outages. In the Fayum oasis, archaeologists found terraced fields fed by gravity flow channels that required no moving parts, a design so efficient it's being revived by permaculturists in drought-stricken regions. Even disaster response holds lessons. When the Nile failed, Pharaonic tax collectors adjusted grain quotas based on flood levels recorded in nilometers, a flexible approach worlds apart from modern fixed-rate water allocations that spark conflicts between nations. Climate change adds urgency to these ancient insights. Core samples from the delta show how rising sea levels once forced Ramesses II to relocate entire cities inland, a scenario playing out again today as saltwater creeps into farmland. But here's where history offers hope. The same sediments that buried ports like Heracleion also preserved their solutions: woven reed breakwaters that dissipated storm surges, and mangrove plantations that stabilized coastlines. Dutch engineers facing similar threats are now testing these biomimicry techniques alongside high-tech barriers. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in mindset. The Egyptians revered the Nile as a living force, celebrating its floods with festivals rather than fighting its cycles. Modern megaprojects like Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, which pits upstream and downstream nations in a zero-sum game, could learn from the Pharaonic model of shared custodianship. Temple records describe water overseers who mediated disputes between provinces, ensuring equitable distribution, a concept echoed today in Senegal's river councils, where farmers and fishers jointly manage resources. The stakes couldn't be higher. By 2150, the Nile's flow could drop by 70%, threatening 100 million lives. Yet buried in the dust of abandoned canals and silt-clogged harbors are blueprints for resilience. From the flexible reed boats that rode out floods to the drought-era grain banks that fed cities for decades, Egypt's past whispers a radical idea. The difference between collapse and survival isn't controlling water, but learning to dance with its endless, unpredictable flow.